against it because he believed that they should pursue a policy of counter-terrorism strategy, not counterinsurgency, where these are sort of nuanced ways in which politicians sort of mix words and give ideas to essentially the same types of strategies. And so what happened was that because Obama didn't initially sign on to this strategy, the Pentagon, along with Stanley McChrystal and his staff, they were leaking facts to the media, and a lot of this being sort of, it was designed in the sense to put Obama in a corner so that he would eventually sign on to it, because initially the counterinsurgency strategy had called for an access of 50,000 additional troops to be deployed to Afghanistan, and this is not even counting the fact that we were also counting on our allies within NATO to also bring in troops, and this included Britain and France and Canada. But what had happened was that at the time, Britain and France were all, because of their own problems that they're having within their own countries, both economically and politically, they were beginning to consider withdrawal of their own forces. And so the U.S. was then required to make that commitment alone, for the most part. And so what happened was that, most of you guys probably know about almost 3 years ago, President Obama gave a speech to West Point in December of 2009, in which he was advocating the reason as to why we should go in, why we should escalate the war in Afghanistan. And initially, although McChrystal did wanted the 50,000 troops, he signed on for 30,000. And so the 30,000 was sort of, at least according to most reports, was his way of sort of appeasing the anti-war activists, as well as sort of appeasing the neocon and neoliberal war hawks within the political system in the U.S. And essentially, this sort of led to this explosive escalation of the war in Afghanistan starting from 2009. And in fact, if you look at it from a military perspective, you look at it from just the number of drone strikes, we're looking at drone strikes that are in excess of 100% of what the previous administration had initially wanted that were used for the and the problem is that even though we use a drone to kill 100 civilians just to get a few so-called bad guys, the problem is that most of those drone strikes aren't even taking place in Afghanistan, they're taking place in Pakistan. And that's the problem. This is why we continue to have the problem. And from my personal research and everything that I've been able to gather, at least my own personal opinion of this is that really Afghanistan isn't so much the issue. The issue has always been Pakistan. We have to understand this and this much about Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and Mujahideen. These folks were initially freedom fighters who were supplied weapons and training back in the 80s to fight out the Soviet invaders under the from the U.S. government. Obviously, many of you guys might have saw the movie Charlie Wilson's War, and this was about a congressman from Texas who was sort of the forefront of this whole neo-conservative push to this is how we're going to fight the Russians in this Cold War in the 80s. So we're just going to arm the enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of tactic that we took of this. And essentially what has happened is that we continue to give billions in aid to Pakistan, but yet Pakistan turns around and use those billions to build more nukes. They turn around and use those billions to train their own specialty groups like the ISI, who have, in most cases, according to a number of reports, have been infiltrated by elements of both the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And essentially what has happened is that we continue to pursue a foreign policy initiative of nation building in a country that essentially, one, we haven't really committed any resources to actual nation building in. If you still look at it from that perspective, we have built very few schools. You might hear a report here that say, okay, well, we built this school in this northern province in Afghanistan, or we built this down here in Kandahar, and we're looking at, you're building one school for a nation that needs far hundreds more. And not to mention the fact that in many cases we've through the help of the CIA, through a joint military CIA program, we've been able to sort of lift up the opium crops there, or the producers of the opium crops, the farmers there. In a sense, we've been protecting them, and just to go into an earlier statement that Eric Ruder had made about the Karzai-led government, was that Hamid Karzai's brother was essentially the U.S. power broker in that area. He was the guy that brokered the deals with the warlords. He was the guy that was able to bring them to the table along with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda to sort of broker this pseudo peace agreement between these various factions. And the problem is that within those regions between Afghanistan and Pakistan, that most of those regions are tribal, and essentially they don't adhere to many of the treaties or the policies that would have been put in place to that would have affected those regions, obviously, because they have their own system of government and culture and how they live. And I'm not going to take up too much more time, and I just kind of want to leave it at this. If we continue to give money, and not only that, we continue to have a military that can wage war, and the level of disconnect between the U.S. population, the civilian population, and the military continues to grow. And I think this is a key. This is how we were able to wage almost 11 years of war in Afghanistan, how President Obama can come out a couple weeks ago and say, yes, we're going to end the war. We're going to end the war in 2014. We're going to withdraw most of the troops, but we're going to leave some of the most specialized group of soldiers in the world in this region to back up the Afghan army and to help provide security and training with them, and how this will continue to go on to 2024. And I went to Iraq back in 2004, and that was like 7 years ago. And to say that we're going to wage another war for almost a quarter of a century is just mind-boggling. Because now what you're going to see is that you're going to have generations of soldiers following me that were probably 10 years old at the time 9/11 happened. They're going to be the ones fighting wars in Afghanistan come 2024 or 2023 or however long into the future we're looking past that 2014.